Welcome in, you guys. Thanks for being here for Jimmy Rants. If you're watching this on IGTV, thanks for being here. Pop on over there, check it out. We do a really good show called Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And if you want to engage live in the content, you need to go follow me. I'm over on Instagram at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVIN LOWCARBMAN. Once you are there, engage live in the content. We have a really good time here doing this live. We also simulcast over here on my Facebook page, so thank you guys for being here today, as well as on a YouTube live. So thanks for everyone watching today on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live here on Instagram, you can actually watch the replay over on IGTV. This is something new they just added. They used to leave it up for 24 hours on Instagram Live and then it disappeared. But the geniuses at Instagram said, hey, we should collate this content, keep it on our server. So now they're putting all Instagram Lives, at least from what I've seen, over onto IGTV. So go check that out. We have a whole Jimmy Rants category, so you can see all the past episodes as of a few episodes ago. So go check that out. If you miss it on IGTV or you prefer other formats, go to JimmyRants.com. We house all the episodes there, especially if they take down all the social media. They will always be at JimmyRants.com. And finally, we have them over on YouTube. Type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. So guys, we've been in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic and dealing with the ramifications of what it's meant to our food supply. And one of the challenges with the food supply has been some of the meat industry challenges that have popped up. And one of the meat industry challenges is a lot of these places where they process the meats, Smithfield Foods, Tyson Foods, are starting to get breakouts of COVID-19, and so they've had to shut down the plants. And so I remember there was a full page ad, and I did a whole Jimmy Rants about this a few weeks ago, where they shut down the plant, and there was a notification from the CEO, I believe it was of Tyson, who said, "Oh, America, get ready. Food shortages are coming, meat shortages are coming." And so it kind of scared everybody half to death. Oh no, what's this mean? Does this mean we won't have access to meat? And as of a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I went into my local Sam's Club and I posted a picture here on Instagram stories. There was no red meat, no fresh red meat. Now you can still get frozen, so there is availability, but from a fresh meat standpoint, there was nothing. I mean, absolutely wiped out. So I went yesterday to my local Sam's Club, and I got there yesterday afternoon, and the whole meat section was packed with people. People were flocking there all around the steaks and the hamburger meat and everything. And I'm like, okay, that's a good sign that there's stuff there. So I work my way in, socially distance, all that stuff. And I find that they do finally have my ribeye steaks that I like back in stock. So I eat kind of a mostly carnivore, keto kind of diet. And so they had the little packages of the sliced, thinner sliced ribeye steaks. There were 6 of them in a package. Typically, the per pound price of that is about $8.99 a pound. You know what? You want to know what they charge now? $16.99 a pound. I just about lost my lunch when I saw that. But I guess it's an indication of what we're going to be talking about here today, of there's less of it and there's a high demand for it, thus they have to raise the prices. And this is some of the challenge here, that yes, we're having a disruption in the meat supply chain, but it's not just that disruption, it's these price increases and other things that are making people have to scramble to find other options. Now, on a previous Jimmy Rants, I talked about how I theorize that this is their creative way of getting people to go to the plant-based burgers, which are far less expensive and just as good, taste just as good. So I still believe that's kind of what they're doing here. But there's some interesting kind of news as it relates to the shortage and the supply chain that I want to talk about in a story from Vox.com here in a minute. But first, I found this one just yesterday from restaurantdive.com, and it's all about what McDonald's has done. Now, I know most of us don't eat at McDonald's, but their meat, despite all the things you probably heard about them, the meat is just beef and salt. There are no preservatives and other fillers and things like that. People have often said that. Maybe I'll do a whole Jimmy Rants because I found a news story where a guy went to a factory from Business Insider. He went to one of the factories for McDonald's and he said, yeah, it's just beef. It's parts of beef, but it's still beef. But they have hedged their bets with this meat shortage and kind of had it ready to go. And so that's why when you go to a McDonald's right now, you won't see a problem ordering meat patties. So let me read that story. McDonald's primes supply chain for potential meat shortage. Supply chain concerns have been cropping up over recent weeks, and for good reason. Tyson Foods chairman John Tyson penned a full-page ad in a bunch of different publications. A bunch of different medications, definitely not medications, publications, warning that the food supply chain is breaking due to widespread facility closures because of the coronavirus. Tyson Foods is the largest meat producer in the United States. Food and agricultural experts have also warned of a meat shortage that will affect grocery stores, which we're already seeing. So with a system as large as McDonald's, any supply disruption could hurt them. They said the company has not suffered, though, yet any supply chain breaks globally, but they do acknowledge it is a concerning environment down the road. This concern isn't just confined to the United States. McDonald's Canada has already started sourcing beef from other countries because of supply chain issues. However, the U.S. approach could have a different result since it's calculating demand across the system. This could affect operators with higher meat sales, particularly as businesses reopen. Further complicating things, there's a big question over what reopen actually means. As of now, businesses will pick up at very different paces state by state as the lockdowns are lifted at disparate times. Coming up with a supply chain forecast is a big challenge on its own without any potential shortages. But no doubt companies with the size and scale of McDonald's and its peers will be better protected from shortages. They have more capital power than smaller chains and independents and will likely win this fight. So the primary thing is these states where they're reopening McDonald's and allowing people to go back in, they're going to have a higher demand for this than the states that are still kind of shut down and really the only way you can order is using like DoorDash or Grubhub or one of those kind of places to get it delivered. And so they can target those areas where there are people going back to the restaurants. So the size and scale of our supply chain, says the McDonald's earning call, has proven to be a significant advantage. And so some of the other restaurant chains have also said we've not seen any problems. The executives at McDonald's predict that it will take months to get back to pre-COVID-19 meat supply levels, but customers are expected to crawl and not run back to restaurants. So that may buy them some time for any potential disruptions. Do you think people will just like ease back into restaurants? I think some people are so desperate. They might be underestimating that. I think people will start running back to restaurants. Now, McDonald's, I'm not so sure, but I know a lot of people who are able to go to a restaurant now. They're going back because they've missed it so much. So according to a new survey from Civic Science, more than 60% of respondents plan to wait more than 1 month before they visit a restaurant dining room after the lockdown is lifted. 60%. So that's like 2 out of 3 people. Are you scared to go to a restaurant? I'm not. I mean, I'm by myself, so I wouldn't go by myself. But if I had someone to go with, I would happily go to a restaurant. I don't know why 60% would wait 1 month before they did it. 20% of respondents plan to wait 6 months or more before they go back to a restaurant dining room. I thought that was a shocking one too. 1 out of 5 people are like, no way, Jose, for the next 6 months. So what is this? This is May, June, July, August, September, October, November. They're not going back until the month of November. What's magical about November that makes it so much better to go out? I guess it's just a product of the fear that they've had us all under. about all this, that people, well, I'm just not going to take any chances, and I don't know. All right, so let me get into the main story, and again, this is from Vox.com. America's meat shortage is more serious than missing hamburgers. The meat supply chain is breaking down, but that's only part of the story. If you go to Wendy's, there's a good chance you won't be able to get a hamburger. You go to the supermarket, you'll probably see some empty shelves in the meat section. You may also be restricted to buying 1 or 2 packs of whatever's available. Oh, by the way, so at Sam's Club, they had a big sign that said limit 1 per customer, but I was using the mobile app to check out, and I grabbed, because all I eat is pretty much meat and other animal-based foods. So I grabbed 2 of them, and it let me check out on my mobile app, and I walked out the door with the 2. Now, I wasn't hoarding them. That's literally all I eat. But they do limit your packs. Try not to look at the prices. And again, I got sticker shock with almost double the price of what I normally pay. They're definitely higher than what you're used to. This is our new reality. Aren't you sick of that? I'm so sick of that phrase. Oh, this is our new normal. Just get used to it, people. This is just the new reality of the world we live in now. Says who? Like, no, I'm not accepting that this is a new reality. In America, where beef, chicken, and pork are not quite as abundant or as affordable as they were a month ago. Well, maybe in the here and now, but why do we need to pretend like this is going to be something that's going to last a very long time? Haven't we, in the industrial age, haven't we been able to have access to meat when we want it? Yes. Are cows just suddenly not available? Pigs suddenly not available? Chicken suddenly not available? Yes, I know about the slaughterhouse challenges with those processing plants being shut down, but let's not pretend like these animals don't exist anymore. They do. They're still there. So I thought that was kind of sensationalist. Don't say it's not going to be as abundant. Again, I still feel like there's this hidden agenda to push us to plant-based burgers as an alternative. The coronavirus has hit the meatpacking industry hard, as some of the worst virus outbreaks in the United States have occurred in the tight, chilly confines of meat processing plants. Standing elbow to elbow workers there, many of them immigrants in already dangerous roles just making minimum wage, are facing some of the highest infection rates in the nation. Sick workers mean meatpacking plants are shut down, and these closures are contributing to a deeply disruptive breakdown in the meat supply chain. The vast majority of meat processing takes place in only a small number of plants, controlled by a handful of large corporations, namely Tyson Foods, Smithfield Foods, JBS USA Holdings, and Cargill. More than a dozen of these companies' beef, chicken, and pork plants closed down in April. Despite an order by President Trump to reopen the plants, managers fear that doing so will put lives at risk, so facilities continue to close. Now, we talked about this before. Why don't they just do mandatory testing and give priority to those workers so that before they go on their shift, everybody is tested? And then that way, if they have a negative test, all right, go to work. And if they get a positive test, go home and be quarantined for X number of weeks. Like, I'm not understanding how hard that would be, and especially if it's an interest of national security and having this meat available and keeping the plants open. I just don't understand why they can't fix this problem. There have been nearly 5,000 reported cases of workers with COVID-19, over 115 meat processing facilities, and at least 20 people have died. And that's just what's already happened. As the pandemic effects stretch into the summer, outbreaks in plants are creating ripple effects. Now there are slower lines in the plants, which means less meat makes it to the market, while farmers are having to euthanize millions of animals that can't get processed because of these slowdowns in the lines. It's a paradox that could disrupt America's food supply for years to come. I'm really both sad and happy at the same time this is happening, because I don't think most people realized the tenuousness of the food supply. And I've talked about this many times before, that I feel like people don't know where food comes from. They don't know the process by which it takes to get food on your table. It's why the grocery store model is so incredibly flawed. And we've talked about, like I said, we've talked about this before. The grocery store model is the model everybody knows because it's the model they pushed on us. But you can buy directly from farmers. There are laws in place that allow you to purchase portions of a cow, for example, that you would own 1/8 of a cow, and you would share that cow with 7 other people, and you would split it up. And there's local farmers and farmers markets where you can buy food from. But when you ask people, where do you get food, and especially kids, where does food come from? Grocery stores. And so, yes, the supply chain is being disrupted, but look what it's exposing. It's exposing the flaw in our food system. And I think this could be an educational moment if we use it as such. So there's a bottleneck in the system through which meat in the United States must flow in order to get ground beef to go to Wendy's, for example, chicken breast to your local grocery store, bacon to your nearby diner, now trying to run takeout business, so forth and so on. Things will get tricky on the other side of the bottleneck, where thousands of farmers have planned the lives of their animals around a schedule that terminates all those meatpacking facilities. If those plants are not up and running, it's not like they can just keep the cows, chickens, or pigs in a nearby field. Somebody mentioned that to me. I don't understand why they just can't keep the animals alive until these slaughterhouses are ready. What you don't realize is they time it perfectly, because if an animal gets to be too old, the meat can get tougher, the flavor changes. There's just so many things that are based on a timetable that could start 2 years ago when you're talking about a cow. When they start raising cattle from a very small calf and going to a full-grown cow, that's a 2-year process. And so can you imagine in 2018 that those poor ranchers who started growing cows and feeding them and doing all the things to make them into beef, did you think they would ever imagine there would be a global pandemic right at the time that Betsy was supposed to be processed and made into meat and beef for customers? I don't think anybody could have. So if you hold them, they gain weight, and you have to feed them. That's the other thing. You have to keep feeding them, and these guys aren't making any money because they were planning on selling these animals. In fact, a lot of the ranchers are getting creative, and they're feeding some of their crops, which they also can't get to the market. They're feeding their crops to their animals to try to keep them alive. And so all that gets very expensive. If they gain too much weight, then they're going to be too big to be processed in these meat plants like Smithfield. So they can't weigh more than a certain amount. And you can't really put a cow on a diet. You kind of have to keep feeding them and following them through their natural life cycle. So you may try to hold them up or keep the animals waiting in a feedlot, or you're going to have to kill them, euthanize them. So now imagine this at a grander scale. According to Jason Lusk, an agricultural economist at Purdue University, the meat processing capacity in the United States is down already by about 40% from normal. In the pork industry alone, that's about 200,000 pigs that cannot be slaughtered because the meat packing plants that would process them are closed or are otherwise unavailable currently. If nothing changes right now, those 200,000 excess pigs a day become 1 million pigs a week with nowhere to go but to be killed and buried. And that's the reality, I suppose, of this processing line, the food supply, meat chain line. What happens when something happens like a global pandemic that messes up that food supply chain? And we're seeing it exposed right now. The numbers are staggering, but that's the reality. The pork situation is actually a lot more forgiving than what's happening to beef right now. Hogs take about 9 months to get to slaughter weight. Cows take up to 24 months, that 2 years we were just talking about. So euthanizing and burying a herd of cattle could send ripple effects through a farm's productivity for years, since euthanized herds mean lost revenue and less investment squeezing farmers who were already fighting to compete in an industry with tight margins. Think about it. 2018, these cattle ranchers start raising a little cow, and they feed them every day, day in, day out. They let them, munch on the grass in the field. They feed them hay. They do all the things to feed them, and all the expense that goes along with that. If they were to lose that cow because they were supposed to be slaughtered this year, and they start a brand new calf to be ready for 2022, how do they have the money to afford to take care of that calf now after losing the income? And again, the margins are very small, so they put all that work in for very little pay. You can see where this crisis is kind of at a head. None of this means that America is going to run out of hamburgers or chicken fingers or bacon in the foreseeable future. However, this historic disruption in America's meat supply is bound to have more lasting effects on the workers, the farmers, and maybe even the way we think about food itself. Meat packing companies could turn to automation. If you don't need people in there, there's no risk of COVID-19 if it's just a bunch of machines, but that would make people lose their jobs, but we would still have our meat. You're kind of trading things off there. You put workers out of jobs, struggling farmers might be forced to consolidate, and we've seen that a lot as well, further shifting power to big ag. So we're already worried about factory farming, and now these smaller farmers that depend on these processing plants to get their meat to the market and to make their money and to stay viable, they're all in jeopardy right now. Understanding how we got to this point in the United States where 2 months of disruption caused the whole system to break down requires historical perspective. So those of you that remember from your schooling days, there was this piece of literature called The Jungle. Remember that, by Upton Sinclair? His novel turned the American meat industry upside down over a century ago. It exposed inhumane working conditions for immigrants in processing plants in Chicago. The public seemed less interested in the human interest aspect of the book. Instead, they fixated on the details of the dangerous, unsanitary meatpacking plants. A few months after The Jungle was published in 1906, the U.S. government passed the Meat Inspection Act, and they established the FDA. So we have the FDA today because of some of the failures of things in the meatpacking industry. Will we have a new government something out of this coronavirus crisis? Oh no, that'll be interesting to watch. Sinclair famously said of that legislation, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit them in their stomach." So what Upton Sinclair said then still rings true. While the FDA did address public concern over more sanitary conditions in these plants, the workers continued to struggle, doing backbreaking labor for very low wages. Meanwhile, the meat industry was tightly controlled by just a handful of powerful corporations. It's still true today. It was technology that laid the groundwork for America's hyper-consolidated meat supply. The innovation of the refrigerated rail car in the late 19th century meant meat could be shipped across the U.S. more easily than animals could. Chicago meat magnate Gustavus Swift's company perfected the design for ice boxes on wheels, enabling the shipment of meat across the United States and around the world. So there was another Chicago firm called Armour and Company. They became early adopters of these refrigerated boxcars, and the consolidation of the industry continued to follow. By the turn of the century, the so-called Big Five packers controlled the vast majority of the meat industry, including all of the infrastructure that connected farmers to processing plants and then to your dinner table, where Americans were suddenly enjoying more kinds of meats for lower prices. So a lot of people would look at that story and say, wow, look at how technology advanced, look at how they consolidated, look at how wonderful it was, because the end product was we had meat on the table pretty much on demand, whatever we wanted. And now we're seeing that very small, finite control of these just few companies is causing some major problems now of the things that people are used to seeing when it comes to getting meat. This centralized model for meat production, especially for beef, really has not changed in the last 100 years or so. The system built by the original Big Five became a paradigm for the modern industrial agricultural business in the United States. Some of the companies still have a very tight grip on America's food supply. Swift and Company is now JBS USA. Armour and Company got bought by Conagra, and the Armour brand was then later sold to Smithfield Foods. Meatpacking remains consolidated to just a few dozen Midwestern processing plants, many of which are owned by a handful of corporations like JBS and Smithfield. That's why when a few of these processors get shut down like they have the last few weeks, the country's entire meat supply begins to suffer. So you see, our reliance on these few companies to not have any disruptions is biting us in the butt now. And this coronavirus is exposing this part of our food supply. And the meat supply chain challenges are hitting those of us that eat meat the most. If you're eating keto, you're eating carnivore, you're having some kind of an animal-based food diet, this sucks right now. Like, are you noticing that? Like, you're trying to go get some meat for your family and you desperately want to have this available because you're trying your darndest to stick to your keto plan, even though the temptation is to eat every crappy garbage out there. You're trying to stick to plan, but then this comes along and disrupts everything, because not only are you having shortages and unavailability of red meat. I've pretty much been living off my backyard chicken eggs until this red meat came back in this weekend. Here locally in South Carolina, finally got some red meat again. But then the price was almost double what it was before COVID-19. So this is really having an impact. The meat supply system relies on a very efficient, well-managed set of logistics. But the problem right now is that the coronavirus has disrupted at least one critical link in the meat supply chain in a way that has never been disrupted before. And that one disruption is rippling through the whole system, which is causing bottlenecks and other issues. So you could argue that Upton Sinclair, in his book, The Jungle, 100 years ago that came out, was trying to warn us. Consolidation of the meatpacking industry had begun years before this came out, The Jungle came out, but while legislation that followed in the early 20th century improved how the processing works, Americans were already hooked on having cheaper, readily available meat, and they seemed unwilling to part with the luxury no matter how despicable the industry was. This is opening people's eyes, you guys, and my hope with all this is that people see, oh my gosh, there has to be a better way. And what they have no idea about is there is a better way, and it's usually within 100 miles of your house. It's a local farmer. And for a lot of people in their local area, you also have local farmers markets. And those farmers come directly to that market bringing grass-fed beef, bringing pastured chickens and eggs, bringing these real whole foods, these animal-based foods that are now we're having trouble getting access to. They have them available. And I know we kind of in the last 10 years seen an awakening of real food. We've seen an awakening of people going back to farmers and farmers markets. Farmers markets have been exploding in popularity, but still the vast majority of people are buying their food from grocery stores. And they don't realize there's a better way. And now everybody's up in arms. Oh, I can't get my food. And they don't realize there's other ways to get it. So if nothing else, hopefully this is an education process. Many people looked right past the plight of the immigrants working Chicago's meatpacking plants. The big meat corporations continued to exploit cheap labor. 100 years later, workers in meatpacking plants are getting sick and dying, they're saying because of coronavirus, but most Americans are instead focusing on Wendy's being out of burgers. So, in a full-page ad that ran in the New York Times and other papers on April the 26th, Tyson Foods Chair John H. Tyson said the food supply chain is breaking and warned that millions of animals, chickens, pigs, and cattle will be depopulated because of the closure of the processing facilities. 2 days later, President Trump issued an executive order declaring meat processing plants critical infrastructure, attempting to keep the workers on the line. Unions cried foul, arguing that corporate interests would continue to put profits over their members' lives. Public health officials called to close more plants experiencing outbreaks, but in some instances, the government kept those plants open. So there is this really fascinating conversation going on with this. Do we have this demand for meat to be processed, and thus it's kind of, as he put it, the critical infrastructure of our food supply includes having the meat available, or the health of the workers there? And again, I don't understand why they could not have these availability of tests that before you get on the line, you test for COVID-19. And let it be one of those really accurate tests. And if they test negative, then go to work. And if they test positive, go home. Don't come back for X number of weeks. Quarantine yourself. I don't understand why they can't do that. There was no meaningful meat shortage at the time, contrary at the time of Tyson Foods talking about the food supply chain is breaking. The closures of meatpacking plants had so far rattled the food supply chain, causing meat prices to go up and stores to run out of certain items. Even as dozens of processing plants were closing due to the outbreaks, the meat giants had at least a couple weeks worth of frozen meat in storage that could keep grocery stores in stock. I remember watching on Instagram this farmer. He was from his barn. He had all the cows in the background, and he said, "Look, we're not running out of meat. Now, if you're talking about fresh meat, yes, we have supply chain issues. But from a frozen meat standpoint," he's like, "we've got billions of pounds worth of beef and chicken all at the ready that could feed us for 1 to 2 years. If that's all anybody ever ate was beef and chicken, there's billions of it in frozen form." So I thought that was really interesting when I heard him say that, because they're only talking about the fresh market, the freshly slaughtered meat. But from a frozen meat standpoint, there is seemingly a lot more than they're letting on. The U.S. commercial stockpile of meat was actually especially large this spring after the meat industry ramped up production. Despite Trump's order and the public's worry about shortages, pork exports to China were still surging in early May. However, availability issues did start to crop up after stay-at-home orders shifted eating habits across the country. Empty shelves in grocery store meat departments led people to start rationing, and the prices of popular items like chicken and ground beef went up. Restaurants closed down. Distributors that supply them found themselves with a lot extra meat that wasn't packaged or labeled to be sold to customers. Some distributors actually opened these up to the public, selling sides of beef and other wholesale cuts to families brave enough to do the butchering at home. As time has gone on, more primal and subprimal cuts of meat have started showing up in grocery stores. So all this meat that was planned to go to grocery stores, to restaurants where they're not intended to sell them to retail for customers, they're having to repurpose that because they don't have near the demand in restaurants because restaurants aren't open. So they're selling them directly to the customer. Can you imagine the logistics of all this, trying to keep up with it? It's pretty fascinating. So this is a direct reflection of two things. One is reduced availability of labor in the packing plant because of the fears of people getting sick and getting COVID-19. The second is some of it may be due to the fact we're pulling inventory out of cold storage. So you should expect to see more of this in the coming weeks and months as the supply of retail cuts of meat goes down. What shows up at your grocery store might start to look a little bit different as distributors scramble to meet the demand, and prices are expected to go up. Like I said, I went to get ribeye steaks yesterday at my local Sam's Club, usually $8.99 a pound, $16.99 a pound now. Beef trimmings, which are used in Wendy's burgers, they generally cost 25 cents a pound as of April 1st, By the first week of May, that cost was up to $1.93 a pound, almost 8 times higher. So Wendy's could get beef, but it's running low on burgers because beef is getting expensive, and they would have to raise prices eventually and pass it on to the consumer. But there is another potential future, one that's much scarier than the one we suffer from expensive ground beef. It's entirely possible that meatpacking plants will continue to shut down because of the COVID-19 outbreaks. This will lead to years of disruption to the American food supply. Based on the level of panic in the boardrooms of companies like Tyson Foods, this just doesn't seem possible, but it is likely. In a May 4th investor call, Tyson said that its hog processing facility was down 50%, the capacity. One economist told the Washington Post that figure is actually probably closer to 75%. With many of its plants closed and other operating at reduced capacity, Tyson says it expects to continue to face slowdowns and temporary idling of production facilities in the near future due to worker shortages in cleaning. We will not hesitate to idle a plant to get a deep cleaning when the need arises. This situation is not much different for other meat packers like Smithfield, who's closed plants in Wisconsin and Missouri, as well as the massive Sioux Falls, South Dakota plant, which we talked about on previous Jimmy Rants. Cargill has already shut down plants in Pennsylvania and Nebraska. JBS USA shut down its beef production facility in Colorado, as well as a pork plant in Minnesota. So, as you can see, this again is underscoring our reliance on the traditional food supply system. And guys, I don't think this is as gloom and doom as they're making it out to be in this story. And I get it. I've talked about news stories. They're going to try to make you fearful. They're going to try to show kind of worst case scenario. I think this is good news. And it's good news because I hope it's making people seek out who those people are locally that are providing good food for you. And here's the funny thing. All of these kind of meat products that are coming to your grocery store, they're not the best quality of meat that would be available. They're not. They're typically grain-fed, corn-fed, and they're given like all kinds of feed. I've heard and done some Jimmy Rant stories before where they've actually fed cows old candy that's not consumable by human beings anymore. They just feed them the old candy. And so they're stuffing their mouths with these things to fatten them up. And then you end up getting that into the meat when you eat that meat. So if you go see a local farmer, not only are you avoiding all of that catastrophe meat, you're now getting a better quality meat that is at least grass-fed. May not always be grass-finished, but it's definitely grass-fed, which gives you more omega-3 fats. It gives you all kind of good quality micronutrients. Can I just say that if that is the unintended consequence of this meat supply chain breaking down, that people are driven to go see a local farmer or go to a farmer's market and start buying from them, the hindrance to that all along that people have always thrown this excuse up as to why they can't do that is, well, grass-fed meat is way too expensive. Okay, well, guess what? My ribeye steak went from $8.99 a pound to $16.99 a pound. Has anything changed about that local farmer's meat? No, other than probably greater demand and people who are woke going to see them. I think this is wonderful. I think at the end of the day, if this is our new normal, if this is the new way of things, that's great. It's really great. The top 4 beef processors process over 80% of the slaughtered beef. And that is the beef that generally gets sold through grocery stores. Over 60% of poultry and pork are also processed by these big companies. They added that poultry is so vertically integrated that corporations like Tyson actually own the chickens, and everybody involved in getting that chicken to the store is simply working for Tyson. So Tyson, don't get me started on Tyson. The smaller processors don't have the capacity to deal with all these cows, chickens, and pigs. The coronavirus pandemic does not have an expiration date, so we don't know how long the plants might be struggling with outbreaks among workers that will further delay processing or shut down plants. Even with some version of social distancing, it's apparent these facilities, just like nursing homes and prisons, are becoming especially prone to COVID-19 outbreaks. Again, I will repeat this over and over and over again. Test, test, test some more. It would not be hard to get a couple hundred factory workers before they start their shift to take a COVID-19 test. And if they're negative, then they go to work. And if they're positive, you go home and quarantine. Why is this hard? I don't get that. These facts ultimately add up to an unnerving amount of uncertainty for the farmers who don't know if the animals that they've been raising for months or years will make it to slaughterhouse or if they'll have to dump them in a ditch. Farmers have had to do this, and they stand to lose even more money attempting to keep their animals alive long enough to get sold to a meat processing plant. Some farmers might be able to sell the carcass to a rendering plant where they can make things like pet food and shampoo. It's also bad news for the small and medium-sized meat processors, which simply aren't designed to handle large volumes required to keep the supply chain intact. It's troubling for grocery stores because of all the turmoil in the meat supply chain could eventually change the way people eat. This is an interesting part of this story. If there's not availability of meat and that availability becomes less and less prevalent, people are going to have to shift their diet. And for the keto and carnivore dieter, where do you go if shortages in meat make it that it's not available? I'll tell you what I did when I went to Sam's 2-3 weeks ago, and their whole shelf, literally, I took a picture. It was empty. The entire meat department. There was no fresh meat at all. Completely empty. So I had to eat on eggs. Thankfully I have 20 backyard chickens. And this is a lesson here too. Go get real food. Grow it on your property. Raise it on your property in the form of chickens. Those things have been a godsend. And I've been eating on the eggs. I have not eaten any of the chickens yet, but that's also a possibility that would be there as well. That if times got tough, I would have access to animal-based foods. And we all need the animal-based foods for complete proteins. So what's happening is the average Joe Schmo is like, well, we don't have access to animal foods. I'll just go buy this plant-based burger. It's like meat. Or I'll just eat a bunch of junk. I'm not feeling good right now anyway, and this will make me feel better. Don't think that's not happening. That's exactly what's happening. We Americans want what we want. We have a deep sense of entitlement when it comes to food. That's true. We are very spoiled in America when we can have readily access to pretty much whatever food we want. Meanwhile, other countries are kind of poor and can't always get the things that they want. So maybe this shines a bright light and puts a mirror back in our faces and says, reality check, America. Now, I know this is hitting more than America, but we do tend to have a bit of an entitlement when it comes to food. There's probably not going to be a meat shortage anytime soon. You'll probably get to continue to eat meat, although it might not be as cheap or readily available over time. There is evidence the American food supply will become more chaotic and unpredictable. Along the way, many poorly paid workers in these meatpacking plants will probably die. See, I don't like the verbiage they're putting in this story. They're trying to make it look like, if you go to work in a meatpacking plant, you're going to die of COVID-19. And the evidence just doesn't support that. But the point is, there is that risk that's there. More animals will die, perhaps millions more. Some farmers might end up losing their land or going bankrupt. So it's not really about just your burger. There's a version of America and its food consumption habits that existed 3 months ago that might not ever exist again. Some might want to feel entitled to get that back. Others want something new. And it's the something new that has me concerned. What does that mean? Is this pushing people to plant-based burgers? Is this pushing people to try to embrace more a plant-based diet? I really hate the whole idea of there being some agenda involved here, but it's hard to ignore what's happening. All right, let's see what you guys have to say. Hope you enjoyed that. Welcome in, welcome in. We're going to come here to Instagram Live first, then we'll pop over here to my Facebook page followers. Thank you guys for being here. And then YouTube will be the last one. So get ready, you guys. JimmyRants.com is the website. Let's see what you have to say. Blazer Mama says, I'm about to find out what awaits me at the grocery store today. Yeah, I think a lot of people are having their eyes open when they go to a grocery store. I didn't think we'd ever see the day that you go to a grocery store and you have trouble finding meat. But that's exactly where we are in America right now. This COVID-19 has really messed things up, has it not? Well, good luck. I hope you find what you need there. The lesson, don't close down countries, says Hafersi. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's the answer. They still probably would have done something with the outbreak of COVID-19 in these meat packing plants. But again, I don't understand why they didn't have protocols in place. They are a vital part of the food supply. Why are they not getting tested daily for COVID-19 before they go on the line? I just don't understand how there's this outbreak. And if it's an outbreak amongst the humans, I guess touching similar surfaces, have they touched the meat? And then does the COVID-19 get on the meat? And of course they lose all that. And so there's just so many reasons why they should be taking extra precautions with those workers. Bonnie says, this is so sad. It is sad. It's sad too that we have to kind of be feel the brunt of this, especially those of us that eat mostly animal-based foods in our diet. Boss Lady says, great work. The frozen food info is very fascinating. We don't eat enough protein in the U.S. World Health Organization says we need a minimum of 47 grams of protein per day. That's so wrong. 47 grams of protein. Wow. So I had 8 eggs for breakfast yesterday morning, and I had 3 thinly sliced ribeye steaks. I'm going to go with the 8 eggs had probably, 120 grams of protein, 120 grams of protein. And the 3 ribeyes I had today was probably another 140 grams of protein. So yeah, they can bite me with their minimum amount of protein. I think the meat plants are not willing to hire and pay workers at a living wage. They get labor from migrants. Well, and again, that's a totally separate issue. If we do like our cheap meat, then yes, that is kind of the price. But yeah, you're right. They definitely should pay them better. But Americans will have to be willing to pay more for the meat if they do that. Bonnie says, farmers by me in Illinois can't find anyone to slaughter them, get them ready, because even little smaller butchers are booked up for a year. It's really crazy. So killing the animals may be the only result. And to me, that is so sad, especially if you're a grass-fed farmer and you've made sure that this animal was taken care of, the cow was fed grass, and you did all the proper protocols to make sure it's quality meat, and then have to bury that cow. I could not imagine the pain of that. I feel we don't have enough testing, even though they say we do. If that was the case, no need to close down, just test. Just my thoughts. Yeah, Bonnie, as far as I know, the testing is available. I don't know why they're not allocating it. I know on the front lines of COVID-19, that's where the precedence takes place. But we have enough. I know a lot of the Major League Sporting, Major League Baseball and the NBA, they're already talking about being able to test the players to finish their seasons, or in the case of baseball, starting their season, maybe an abbreviated season, and that they'll have plenty of tests to do that because they did check to see if there was availability. My one son said, see mom, go plant-based, because it looks like that's what's happening to me. They're pushing an agenda for me. Yeah, I don't like the whole idea of forcing veganism on people if that's what they're doing. And of course, I don't think this was contrived just for that purpose, but don't you dare think they won't use it for that purpose. Why wouldn't they? It seems like a golden opportunity. And they've been trying to make headway for people buying these plant-based burgers and making people go more plant-based. I've talked about this Agenda 21 that's been out there and how it's like a stated purpose to get people to go plant-based and to get rid of all meat in the food supply by the year 2035. Now along comes COVID-19, a very convenient way to mess with the food supply and mess with the meat chain. I don't know. The meat companies don't want all this spotlight on their meat practices. Yeah, that's true. Yes, to me, they're all the big people, but what about the little guys? Yes, for testing. Indeed. All right, thank you, Instagram. Let me pop over here to my Facebook page. What's up, you guys? See what you guys have to say about this topic here today. Thanks for being here. Nancy says, on restaurants and fear, it's not fear for myself, but I do have a high-risk husband, so while I'll be fine going to restaurants and other places, now that Virginia is opening, I have to be careful not to bring the COVID-19 virus home to him. It's not really fear, just everyone making the best decision. I agree with that, Nancy. I think you do the best you can in your situation. But I don't think that you have to necessarily not go to the restaurant because of your husband being a high risk. I think you go to the restaurant, you come home and you thoroughly clean and everything. If you have those concerns, there is a way around that. Remember, Smithfield Foods was bought out several years ago by a China-owned company. That's true. Maria says, keep it local. Keep it local always. Local is going to be your best bet for getting good quality. And plus you get to meet the local farmers. I don't understand why eating local is so taboo for people other than they just don't know about it. All right, let me come over here to my YouTubers. Thank you guys for being here today as well. Woo, look at all them comments. I noticed some steak was $18 a pound at Kroger the other day. Yeah, that's where it's going. Mike says, sounds like I have some fasting coming up to preserve my meat freezer. Fasting is a great thing to do. The problem is, how long do you fast if they're not going to have availability of meat? Trina says, what about the rest of the world? Yeah, I'm concerned the rest of the world. I suppose they have things like rice and things like that they eat, but man, it's not a pretty picture, that's for sure. Johnny says, I have a whole cow order from local farmer coming by July the 5th. $5 a pound, can't beat the price in California. Wow, that's good, man. Trina says, look out, the fake meat is coming. Oh, it's already here. The fake meat is here. It's just a matter of, can they convince people that because we have the meat shortages, that is the option that you should choose? For people like you and me who are aware that beef and salt is far different than all this chemical crap storm that they put in a Beyond Beef burger or an Impossible burger. They're not the same. But to the average consumer, do they know that? I don't think they do. All right, let me come back over here to my Instagram, see if we got any final comments as my cat is throwing up in the background. What are you doing? Are you okay? Hairball. All right, no other comments it looks like. So yes, the meat supply, you guys, the chain is kind of messed up right now. And what do you do about that? You go to the local grocery store, you go to your Sam's Club, Costco, and you don't see red meat. Get used to it. This is kind of going to be the normal here until some of this supply chain gets corrected. And I don't know when that's going to happen because people are still fearful of COVID-19 and they're fearful of getting it in these plants. And so they're keeping the plants shut down. I just wonder how much longer they're going to keep that ruse up of shutting them down, reopening, shutting them back down, and what that effect's going to be. I hope you have the take-home message that I've been sharing here today of find local farmers. I've mentioned this website before, eatwild.com. Go look up your zip code and it will find a local farmer to you. I used to have one down the road from me, about 20 miles from here. They had to shut down a few years back, but they used to be my go-to, and they would sell retail like grass-fed beef and all kinds of things. I would always buy from them. In fact, they would give me beef tongue sometimes, and any of like the cow heart, the cow brain, kidney, liver, all the things that I wanted. So find one. And because the price of meat is so high in the grocery stores now, it might actually be cheaper to buy from a local farmer, ironically, than it would from a grocery store. Fascinating times we're living in right now, you guys, and I hope you are embracing the things that are out there that are solutions to these things that they're making it look like there's an impossible solution to, but there's really not. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. As always, you can engage live in the content. Go follow me over here on Instagram. I am at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Boss Lady wants to know that address to the website for your local farmer. Eatwild.com, EATWILD.com. If you want to find, and you just type in your zip code and you'll find them. I did that for my area here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I think the closest one that sold grass-fed beef was about 100 miles away down in Anderson, South Carolina. So I may be taking a trip there soon. So thank you for that. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay on IGTV right here on Instagram. So go check that out. Thank you if you watched this on IGTV. If you missed the live, though, and you missed the replay on IGTV, then pop on over to JimmyRants.com. We house all the episodes there. You can see them there. Also over on YouTube. Just type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Jimmy Rants. And until next time, we'll see you then.